I'm really excited tonight to have Robyn Monro Miller with me, who I've known for a number of years, but haven't spoken to for a long time. Robyn, you're a play expert. Tell me what makes you a play expert.
Well, the term play expert, I'm not overly comfortable with. I think I prefer to call myself a play advocate. And I'm an advocate for play because I believe it's so critical to healthy human development. And I think play is the process by which we actually learn to navigate the complexity of life. And if we are not actually encouraging play for our children and encouraging opportunities for play, then we really are in a sort of at a disadvantage as a community, as a society. So expert doesn't sit well with me.
Okay, look, I love being an advocate of many things, so I'll cope with the advocate.
Yeah. Well,
you've got some formal roles though, haven't you?
I do, and my passion for advocacy has led me on a sort of on a journey with different organisations who promote play. I'm on the board of Play Australia, and I also am on the board of the International Play Association, and I'm currently president of the International Play Association.
Cool. That sounds important. I didn't even know there was a play association.
There is, and it's 61 years old, so it's got a very long, distinguished history with membership across 52 countries.
Okay, so look, you've got to answer this question, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
1 minute family daycare educators are being told that they have to abide by a million regs, you know, to ensure the safety of every child in family daycare. And the next minute, they're being told that they should engage in risky play. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard to get your head around that 1 minute you're wrapping children up in cotton wool and the next minute you're saying, no, go out there and climb that thing unaided. What's that all about?
And I think, you know, some people see it as a contradiction, but I actually don't. And the reason is that when we talk about risky play, we're not necessarily talking about harm. And what the regulations and the guidelines are all about are protecting children from harm. And people immediately, an adult perception, when you hear risk, you think harm. And the reality is risk is something that takes you outside your comfort zone. Risk is about uncertainty and unpredictable, you know, and what's unpredictable. It doesn't mean you're out of control. And it doesn't mean if you take a risk, you're going to get harmed. And I think that's where in our head, we get quite concerned. We say, but, you know, we can't because we're not allowed to because of all these risks. We're not allowed to take risks. And then we see risk as something that is inevitably going to result in harm. So I just think it's about our language. And so I like to think of risky play as child-led adventure play. You know, and I know where this term risky play came from. It actually started back in the UK. The introduction of the term risky play was to actually make sure that people understood play, you know, that the importance of play and risk, and tried to desensitize people to it. But I don't necessarily think it's had that effect. And people are sort of talking about that as, does that actually help with our modern day understanding of play? So I think if you're thinking about this from your perspective of regulations, just remember that what you're trying to do is encourage children to step outside their comfort zone. And that means it's challenging children to take on their own emotional and physical risks and test their own ability and limits. It's no different to the play that used to always happen. We just suddenly have given it called the title risky play. But it's pretty normal behaviour of children.
Okay, so let's make it really clear to me. If I'm in a family daycare and I'm looking at something and you are next to me, what, you know, and they're engaging in risky play, what would we be seeing?
Okay. Well, I suppose if I was in family daycare, I would be looking at, I'd be seeing children who are testing their skills. So they would basically be involved in balancing or climbing. They wouldn't have an adult hovering. An adult would be at a sort of a safe distance, but, you know, watching them and checking on them. They would be exploring. They would be maybe building things, making things with loose parts, testing things out. They would be being challenged themselves, challenging themselves internally, you know, as to, will this fit together? Will that fit together? That, you know, and in the natural environment, you see children quite often sort of undertaking what people might consider is risky play by climbing over boulders, climbing up trees, or trying to climb up sort of different sort of ledges. So that is what I would be seeing in a family daycare situation. But the other thing I'd be seeing, and I'd like people to remember, and it's frequently not covered, is that not all play has to be physically challenging. There is also an emotional risk to play. And I think that's often a very neglected area where people talk about risk in play and they don't think about, and researchers rarely cover that emotional risk. So in that context, educators, I'd see, would not be immediately stepping in to manage a situation. They would allow for children to have some disagreement, where children, they would even allow at times some temporary exclusion of children by other children, because there's this emotional risk that children take when they're playing. So that you can scaffold that, of course, and say, well, what will you do next? But it's about the emotional risk children take when they have to re-enter a game, and when they have to renegotiate the rules so that they make
And that's often true with family daycare, where you might have a younger child taking the risk of joining in with the older children.
Yes,
that can often be quite hard.
And we don't have to take that younger child over to the older children and say, here, play with them. You know, we can encourage them. What are you going to do? How will you encourage them? How will you go and play with them? If you'd like to, what will you do? Encourage them to take those emotional risks. I think we do too little of that in play. We intervene.
So what are the elements that make play risky?
Okay, well, I would certainly say, actually, if I could go back a bit, Lisa, I need to say one more thing about this family daycare. I think educators need to be careful about the language they use, because that's the other, the language we use can actually give a child a perception that they're not competent and they're not capable. And so a language that educators will use should be things like, instead of be careful, just saying, let me know if you need help. So instead of sort of warning them all the time, how are you going to do that? What will be that problem? So having those questions rather than stop, be careful, and those sorts of things. So I think that will be the other part of the educator's role. When it comes to risky play, and traditionally risky plays largely been recognised in literature as falling into 6 categories. Now, when I read these categories, they scare me, okay? The way they're described, they do, the educator in me, because I come from the out of school hours background, I don't like the way that's phrased. But this is what the literature says. This is how the literature is sort of defining what risky play is. So I think we put our own sort of glasses on and our own lens through that. So the first one is with height. So risky play, they see anything with height. So that can be the monkey bars, the trees. It can be just a large boulder that a child scrambles up onto. It doesn't have to be huge height. Remember, we're not talking adult heights. We're not going, they're not adults. So a height for a small child can be just a minimal height. And it also can be, balancing, balancing along a sort of a ledge or a rock can be a height for a child. The second element of risky play is high speeds. And when they describe high speeds, I just do, the adult in me does high speeds, no. But if you remember as kids, going really fast on a bike doesn't mean you're going 60 miles an hour, okay? You only can go as fast as your little legs will pedal, but, going fast, and that's the thing. We keep putting our adult lens on things, doing high speeds, no, high heights, no, because we're thinking from an adult perspective. But high speeds from a child's perspective can be rolling down a hill. Rolling down a hill, and suddenly that was fast. And it might, obviously, if we tried to roll down a hill, I just don't seem to roll anymore. And of course, the third one they talk about with tools. Okay, and we often see children with, they often use woodwork tools as the example. How to scare a whole group of educators, give them really adult-sized hammers and nails and say this is risky play. Not necessarily. The tools that we can use can be woodwork tools, but all sorts of cooking tools, different bits and pieces of our daily life can be incorporated, and children taught how to use tools. It's not unusual for children of, in sort of under 5-year-olds, 3-4-year-olds, to actually be taught how to use glue guns with supervision. All of those sorts of things are quite risky to a young child, but when someone is there to help them, it's actually scaffolding that behaviour. And I say this is time consuming. The next one is elements. So playing with fire and water and rain, all of those things are seen as a risky play. This one I like. This number 5 in that list of, risky elements is the chance of getting lost. Now, that's the hide and seek. That's the adventures you go on. And once again, it's their perception of being lost, their perception of hiding. We may still be able to see them very clearly, but to them, there's that risk element. And the final one, and the one that often happens and people feel it's some sort of behavioural issue, is rough and tumble play. So rough and tumble play is risk-taking behaviour, but it's one of the most incredible ways of children learning self-regulation, of, learning, play fighting and ball games. They learn self-control. They learn to pick up visual cues. It's a really powerful form of risky play. So they're the 6 categories. And I think those 6 categories, as I said before, they only address physical risk. And within each of those, there will be emotional risk. But I do believe, we've got a bit more to unpack when it comes to play. That's why there's no experts on play. Play is so big and diverse. Which part of play are you going to focus on?
Okay, so I get what the elements are, but how are those things good for children? How is it good for a child to experience height? How is it good for a child to experience speed?
Well, I suppose, look at a broader picture of play in any form is good for kids. It's essential. And the process of play triggers not just the physical responses in the body and physical development, but it also triggers neurological changes. And so when we look at play from a risk perspective and learning like risky play, we have got, and unfortunately a lot of the research is done for good reason on animals but animals play. And so they've monitored this. We see, for example, the rats who playing and rough and tumble behaviour in rats. They've measured it's called a brain-derived neurotropic factor. Don't worry, everybody. There's no tests on this one, but BDNF. But I use this as an example because this is a little-known growth hormone in the brain. And it's through rough and tumble play that this BDNF is triggered and helps grow the brain. And so there are a whole lot of mechanisms happening through particular types of play that actually help develop the brain. And people often think of play as just the physical side, but that's where risky play actually is so beneficial. It's believed that the play actually helps with risk, helps the coping mechanisms and provides children appropriate sort of responses to stress and danger. And some neuroscientists have actually described risky play as what they call is antiphobic. So that, as babies can have this natural fear of, as they're learning things, they don't necessarily breach out and do a lot of new things. But as we grow towards self-autonomy and we get, our own sense of agency, we develop these skills. We take risks to move a little bit further, a little bit more to learn about ourselves. And so when children don't get this opportunity, they can develop phobias like height phobias to height, phobias to all of these different things that we're actually testing, when we talk about those 6 categories. So this idea of risky play or child-led challenging play is around developmentally taking us to that next level as human beings, as adults, to be able to function and to be able to deal with stress and cope with change and uncertainty.
Well, I mustn't have had much risky play as a child because I discovered the other day that I'm very risk averse around children. I was with a family daycare educator and her children, and I was kept going, oh, is she okay? How can people like me that are obviously get very scared when they see children doing things that could conceivably end in an accident, manage their own fears?
Well, firstly,
I think most educators probably aren't as scared as I am, but
and you know, the more you know the child, the less fear you have. And if you know, like the more you're working with those children, you know what they're capable of, what's possible. But I don't think that's a bad thing. Adult educators being, you know, sensitive to those issues, because, you know, if you think about the other end of the spectrum, you don't want those in your family daycare service. You just don't care. And I know there's a lot of promotion about, you know, we need to be more relaxed. And I look, that's fine, I agree. But try explaining that when you're an educator with requirements, and when you're an educator that has to explain at the end of the day why that child doesn't look quite the same as they were when they left. You know, that twisted arm or whatever else. So I understand that. And so as an educator, just take a step back and think, okay, what is my level of where's my level of comfort? And one of the things is to do a bit of reflection about that level of comfort. And I would actually encourage you to, when you are sort of trying to sort of see how things are going with play, and you're trying to scaffold some more skill development in, I would say take the extra 5 seconds before you react. You know, and then, you know, once you've left the 5 seconds, maybe you can go 10 seconds, you know, as a child's attempting something, just try to, you know, just do it as gradual, you know, it's a gradual, it's your phobia, you know what I mean? It's your phobia to, will this child be okay? But if you give a child that extra 5 seconds to keep trying something, that extra 10 seconds, and you're watching them, and obviously I've got to stress here, if you see an imminent danger, if you see harm that is just not acceptable, you must intervene straight away, you know, and I think we've got to get the balance right here. But in those, you know, if the child is balancing along a ledge and, you know, and it looks relatively, what's the worst case scenario is could be a skinned knee, then maybe keep letting them balance along that ledge. If you know the other side of that ledge is a, you know, a 6-foot drop, then naturally that's just not risky play anymore. Okay, that just would be reckless, and so you'd say no quickly and pull them off. But
in my mind, a 6-inch drop is a 60 feet drop.
Yes, but you know, it's not, and that's the thing. Have a look at the child. The one thing I'd say about children, we often underestimate their capacity. We often think, oh, you know, they can't do that, and they won't generally attempt something they don't think they can't do. They will attempt it and they will stop when their fear kicks in. You want them to learn that fear mechanism. So one of the things I would definitely say as educators, don't try and teach them to break the fear. Don't lift them up onto something. Always allow them, when they're dealing with play equipment, to handle it themselves. And say when a child's trying to get onto a monkey bar or trying to climb onto a piece of play equipment and they can't get on, and they say, help me, and say, look, I'm not going to help you, because that play equipment's specially designed for kids who can get there. And when you're ready, when you can keep trying, when you can get on there, you'll be able to do it. And whilst that's frustrating for the child at the time, the sense of accomplishment that child feels a couple of weeks later when they can do it, you know, it's just the dopamine explosion in the brain. The pride means that they've got that, they're motivated to do it again. They're motivated to know that learning takes time and you can't do everything at once. So I think we can have that role where, you know, provide the opportunities, provide the environment for risk-taking behaviour to happen, but we don't have to push it.
It's sometimes hard in family daycare to provide that environment, though, because you've always got a spot check in your mind of, you know, someone's like, I noticed with this educator I was with the other day, she said, it's okay, when they get on the slack line, it drops below the allowed height. And it was such an instinctive reaction to say, for her to say, I know this is above the required height of 60 centimetres or whatever it is, I've forgotten what it is, for a piece of equipment, but the weight of the child pulls it down. So, like, sometimes we just make our environments completely sterile and free of risk so that we don't have to justify the height of the slack line.
I think that's where the benefit risk analysis can come in. And for educators who aren't familiar with that, it's been around in the UK since 2002. And that's where you can look at some of the things and look at the risk versus the benefit. Okay, so look at the benefits of, you know, that participation, what's it developing in the child, and how have you managed the risk, you know, how are you managing that risk? I think they're the sorts of things that you need to keep in mind. And if you want more information about that, just Google benefit risk analysis. Kids Safe New South Wales has done a bit of work on benefit risk analysis. So it's not a new concept, it's quite an old one, but it's frequently not used enough. So that educator can explain what they're doing and justify. And that's the important thing, is being able to justify why or how you are doing particular behaviours or practices.
Okay, so some people would be listening to us and saying, okay, I understand the theory, I understand that some risk is good, I understand I should be doing some of it despite all the stuff about, you know, not taking risks that I've learned to date. But I don't exactly know what it is you're talking about. I can imagine bicycles, I can imagine, you know, can you just give me some ideas of some of the things that make up risky play in a family daycare?
Well, I would definitely say definitely opportunities to go outdoors. You know, outdoor play is risky play because of what they can discover in the garden and things like that. So but loose parts, if they haven't explored more about loose parts play is a great way to practice risky play, because it's involved building and putting together things, putting like old sheets, making cubbies, you know, cubbies and old tires. Obviously you check your tires for, you know, no contents inside of creepy crawlies, but those sorts of wood. I mean, in New South Wales we have something called reverse garbage, which people can access sort of a whole lot of different offcuts and different objects, like you know, tubes, you name it, you know, big barrels. Being able to have those where children can sort of build and make things, create environments to play, climb on things. That is one way that you're getting those sorts of things of the, you know, the elements and the chance and the rough and tumble play. So, and also games that allow children to play, you know, rough and tumble games can be another way. There's little ways you can incorporate it into what you're doing with children all the time. And I say for the under fives, I think loose parts is a really great introduction to allow children just to experiment, and that curiosity that comes with.
And when you're talking about loose parts in that kind of a thing, you're talking about outdoor loose parts and quite big ones, aren't you?
Yes, yeah, quite big ones, not the indoor ones. You know? Yeah. And the other thing I would say is if you can have sort of a regular time where you look at what are the local playgrounds in your area that you can go to, because one of the things that many local government areas now are doing is they've got some great playgrounds that have built in what we would call risk, but it's got harm minimization. Okay, you know, they are relatively safe, and I think being able to go and utilize some of those great spaces now is another opportunity where you can get the more physical aspects of play, of that climbing, of finding a height that really works.
Okay, we're going to have to finish, but just tell me, what was your favorite risky play when you were a child?
Well, you see, once again, as a child, I didn't consider it risk, and nobody told me it was risky play, but I absolutely loved the oak tree in my backyard, and I would climb up that oak tree and build unsafe structures in that oak tree. And I remember the very top of the tree, I learned, and so this is horrific. You don't want any, this could make you, if you're risk averse, Lisa, this is going to freak you out. But I remember climbing to the very top of the tree, and it freaks me out when I think about it. And that holding on and realizing at that very point, the wind actually blows you. You know, and it's a bit nerve-wracking. So when I think back to that, I think that was probably one of the narrowest, most unsafe parts of the tree I must have climbed to. But I always remember holding on to me thinking, I think I might have gone too far. I think I need to get back down here, because I could feel the tree moving. So that was mine. What about yours?
I think it was reading a book outside.
Okay, and that could contribute to that the evidence that research is coming up about that phobia.
Yeah.
The risk
No, I was
aversion.
one of those children that I couldn't ride a bike, I couldn't swim, anything physical. I was told I was hopeless at it, so I just gave up and never tried.
And there, once again, that ties in with that language.
And then I did the most riskiest thing of all. I joined the early education and care sector.
and what a beautiful risk.